They shouldn't have come here. The air crackled with electricity, the sharp tang of ozone biting at the back of their throats. Through the murky gloom of the alien battlefield, a single truth resonated. Humanity wasn't supposed to be a part of this war. Not here, not now, not ever. Yet here they stood, and the universe was about to learn a brutal, unforgettable lesson. Before we dive into this tale of swift vengeance and the sheer force of human will, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Now, let's get into the story. The Galactic Coalition had been locked in an unyielding war for 17 years. Across star systems and black holes, alliances crumbled, empires fell, and worlds burned. The enemy was a Krunt, a species bred for war. Their exoskeletons impervious to most known weapons, their minds coldly calculating. For every Krunt soldier destroyed, 2 more emerged from the cloning vats, deadlier than the last. The Coalition, a fragile pact of over 100 alien civilizations, was faltering. The Krunt, with their hive mind precision and relentless efficiency, seemed unstoppable. That is until Earth got involved. Humanity was a latecomer to the galactic scene. Until 50 years ago, Earth had been an unremarkable blue-green speck in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy. But when the Coalition's exploration probe stumbled upon humans, something strange happened. The Coalition didn't see just another civilization. They saw potential. Humans weren't the biggest, strongest, or fastest species. They lacked the advanced technology of the Retarii or the psychic capabilities of the Vinael. But humans were unpredictable, adaptable, and, most importantly, fiercely stubborn. Coalition diplomats watched in amazement as humans unraveled interstellar problems that had stumped other species for centuries. They negotiated peace between warring star clans, revolutionized ancient starship designs, and forged alliances that had seemed impossible. But for all their achievements, humanity had one glaring limitation. They had never experienced galactic war, and they weren't supposed to. Earth was officially designated a protected world, a status that shielded developing civilizations from conflict. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and as the Krunt bore down on the Coalition's heart worlds, humanity was quietly recruited to the rest of the galaxy. Humans were still naive newcomers. To the Coalition's military elite, they were a wild card, a last-ditch gamble in a game that was already lost. The humans came with one condition: no one would interfere with their methods. They demanded full autonomy over their operations, and they got it. The Coalition expected small-scale contributions, perhaps clever tactics or experimental weapons. What they didn't expect was a full-scale deployment. A fleet of human ships emerged from Earth orbit, sleek and bristling with technologies no Coalition engineer could understand. Soldiers followed, men and women clad in armor that seemed to ripple like liquid metal. They spoke little and moved with an unnerving calm. Their leader was a figure shrouded in mystery, known only as General Aegis. They communicated through a voice that was both commanding and unyielding. The Coalition's admirals bristled at Aegis's demands, but the desperation in their ranks left no room for argument. If humanity's gamble failed, it would merely be one more tragedy in a war filled with them. The Krunt were waiting on a barren world called Galith Prime, a staging ground for their next offensive. It was a dead place, its atmosphere choked with sulfur and its ground littered with jagged obsidian spires. Coalition forces had failed to reclaim it 5 times, leaving behind a graveyard of shattered ships and broken soldiers. When the humans landed, they made no grand speeches. Their ships descended in eerie silence, their engines a low hum that resonated across the battlefield. The Krunt greeted them with amusement. Humans were smaller than the Coalition's warriors, their numbers laughable in comparison. But as the Krunt charged, humanity's strategy became clear. They weren't here to fight fair. The first strike came from orbit, a single human frigate, barely larger than a Coalition scout ship, fired a pulse that detonated in the upper atmosphere. The resulting electromagnetic wave fried the Krunt's communication networks, isolating their units. The Coalition's observers gasped. No one had ever breached the Krunt's hive-mind connection before. Then the ground forces moved in. The humans wielded weapons unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Rifles that fired projectiles moving faster than light, grenades that created localized gravity wells, and drones that moved with an intelligence bordering on sentience. They fought with ruthless precision, exploiting the Krunt's every weakness. Within an hour, the Krunt were in disarray. By the second hour, their front lines had collapsed. By the third, their forces were in full retreat. And by the fourth, the battlefield was silent. Galeth Prime was no longer theirs. The Coalition's commanders were stunned. Never in 17 years had the Krunt been defeated so decisively. But for the humans, it was just another mission. They left the battlefield as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only a cryptic message. This was a warning. The Coalition watched in stunned silence as the human fleet ascended from the sulfur-choked skies of Galeth Prime. Victory hung thick in the air, but with it came an undercurrent of fear. What kind of species dismantled an unbeatable foe in mere hours and left without so much as a demand? The Coalition's leaders convened in haste, their chambers filled with hushed whispers and frantic debates. The humans had proven their worth. Yes, but at what cost? Had they unleashed something far more dangerous than the Krunt? In the days that followed, the humans returned to Earth, their fleet disappearing into the void as mysteriously as it had appeared. Coalition reconnaissance ships attempted to track them, but every pursuit ended in failure. The humans were a phantom presence in the galaxy now, leaving only speculation in their wake. Reports trickled in from the few who dared approach Earth, strange energy signatures emanating from their atmosphere, construction of massive orbital platforms, and the deployment of drones to mine asteroids on the far edge of their solar system. Humanity was preparing for something, but no one knew what. The Krunt, meanwhile, were seething. Humiliated on a galactic stage, they regrouped with fury burning in their collective hive mind. But their rage was tempered with caution. The humans had demonstrated a capacity for war that defied logic, dismantling strategies the Krunt had refined over centuries. Their hive queen, an entity revered and feared in equal measure, made a rare decree. Humanity was to be studied, understood, and if necessary, destroyed before they could strike again. But humanity had no intention of waiting for the Krunt to act. 2 months after Galeth Prime, a single human ship, sleek and black as a void, emerged from hyperspace over Krunt-controlled territory. It broadcast a simple message to the Coalition's nearest outpost: observe. Then it moved in silence toward a massive Krunt supply convoy. Coalition spies scrambled to intercept, desperate to understand humanity's next move. The Krunt convoy was formidable. 30 heavy transports flanked by a fleet of destroyers and fighter escorts. It was the backbone of their logistics for the next offensive, guarded with the kind of paranoia only the Krunt could muster. But to the single human ship, it was prey. In the span of minutes, the black ship demonstrated weapons technology that left Coalition analysts reeling. Instead of engaging directly, it deployed what could only be described as living ammunition, projectiles that adjusted mid-flight, weaving through Krunt defenses with terrifying precision. Explosions rippled through the convoy, their energy signatures unlike anything ever recorded. Shielding that had withstood the fiercest Coalition attacks disintegrated, as if it were paper. By the time the Krunt attempted to counterattack, the human ship was gone, disappearing into hyperspace like a ghost. This act of war sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Krunt interpreted it as a challenge, their hive queen ordering the full might of their armada to prepare for retaliation. The Coalition, however, began to see humanity not as an ally, but as an enigma, a power too dangerous to control. Diplomatic envoys were dispatched to Earth, desperate to understand humanity's endgame, but every message was met with silence. And then came the rumors. Coalition spies embedded on Earth began reporting strange phenomena. Cities glowing with unfamiliar lights in the dead of night. Entire regions sealed off under impenetrable energy fields. Civilians disappearing, only to reappear weeks later with no memory of where they'd been. Theories range from advanced military training to experiments that bordered on the unnatural. But the most alarming whispers spoke of something else entirely: the Nexus Protocol. No one knew what the Nexus Protocol was, but the name sent shivers through the Coalition's ranks. It was spoken in fear by defectors who had seen glimpses of humanity's secret projects, described in vague, fragmented terms: a weapon, a shield, a key to something beyond comprehension. Whatever it was, the Coalition knew one thing: it had been activated. The Krunt's retaliation came swiftly. A fleet of over 10,000 ships descended upon Earth's solar system, intent on obliterating the species that had dared to humiliate them. The Coalition observed from a distance, unwilling to intervene, but desperate to witness the outcome. Humanity was outnumbered 100 to 1, their fleet dwarfed by the sheer scale of the Krunt Armada. By all accounts, Earth was doomed. But as the Krunt entered the solar system, they found nothing. No human ships, no orbital defenses, no signs of life. Earth hung in the void, quiet and unassuming, as if mocking them. Confused but undeterred, the Krunt began their assault, bombarding the planet's surface with enough firepower to shatter continents. That's when it happened. The sky over Earth fractured, splitting like glass under pressure. From the rift emerged something that defied understanding, a structure of impossible geometry, glowing with a light that seemed to bend reality itself. The Krunt hesitated, their hive mind overwhelmed by the sheer incomprehensibility of what they were seeing. And then the Nexus activated. The Nexus was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. It shimmered with an ethereal glow, its vast shape defying all logic and physics. A lattice of crystalline structures intertwined, pulsing with the force of 1,000 stars. Energy emanated from it in waves, resonating through space and vibrating the very fabric of reality itself. The Krunt fleet, poised to annihilate Earth, froze as the Nexus unfurled its power. For a brief moment, there was an eerie calm, an oppressive silence that hung like a storm waiting to break. Then, the full force of the Nexus exploded outward in a wave of raw, unbridled power. In the span of seconds, the Krunt fleet was decimated. Their ships crumpled and disintegrated, their weapon systems shut down in an instant, and their fighters turned to dust in the vacuum of space. It was as though the laws of physics themselves were rewritten in that moment. Gravity collapsed in on itself. Time stretched and fractured. The entire Krunt Armada was annihilated, reduced to nothing more than debris drifting through space. The energy from the Nexus rippled outward, pushing the boundaries of the solar system, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. The humans watched from their hidden positions, their fleet of ships now emerging from their cloaking fields, one by one. As the Krunt ships fell apart, Earth's forces moved swiftly, reclaiming their ground. The Nexus was not just a weapon. It was a statement. Humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated, nor a race to be toyed with. They had just rewritten the rules of war itself. Coalition ships that had been watching from a distance now moved into Earth's orbit, their commanders trying to make sense of what had just transpired. Their sensors scanned the debris field where the Krunt fleet once stood, but there was nothing left to analyze. No wreckage, no survivors, no remnants. Just an empty void where an unstoppable force had once been. A single human vessel, black and sleek as before, approached the Coalition's lead ship. The human crew didn't speak over the comms. They didn't need to. The Coalition's fleet had witnessed the power of the Nexus firsthand, and that was all the explanation needed. The commander's voice crackled over the communication channel. "We demand an audience with General Aegis." There was a long pause. The Coalition's leaders had been watching, considering their next move, and now they had only one question. Why? Why had humanity entered the war so forcefully? What did they want? The silent fleet above Earth told a story of overwhelming power, but the nature of that power remained shrouded in mystery. And so, the humans responded at last. A single message was sent back to the Coalition, Just a few words that would echo across the galaxy forever. We fight for ourselves. The galaxy held its breath. For years, the Coalition had depended on humanity's unpredictable brilliance to turn the tide of war. But now they saw something far more troubling, a humanity that had evolved into something far beyond mere collaborators. Humanity was no longer a participant in the galactic struggle. They were a force unto themselves, a new power rising from the ashes of an old war. They had proven their worth, but with it came the unsettling truth. Their methods, their goals, and their path forward were their own. As the human ships turned back toward Earth, no one spoke of an alliance anymore. The Coalition had lost its hold on the narrative. No longer would they dictate the course of the war. The humans had set the stage, and the galaxy was now watching them. Not as allies, not as pawns, but as an uncontrollable, unpredictable power that had the potential to reshape the entire universe. Back on Earth, General Aegis stood in the heart of the Nexus facility. The massive structure pulsed behind them, the air humming with its power. Aegis's eyes, hidden behind a visor of strange, reflective material, gazed out toward the horizon. Below, humanity's cities gleamed under the protective shield that now surrounded the planet. The war had ended, but this was only the beginning. The humans had entered the battlefield, and in the span of 4 hours, they had changed everything. In that short time, they had not just won a war. They had redefined the nature of conflict itself. And now, the galaxy would have to reckon with the new order that had been established. The Nexus had shown what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. No longer would they be a footnote in galactic history. The question now was how long it would take before the rest of the galaxy realized they were the ones who had been changed. The Nexus, as the humans had discovered, was more than a weapon. It was a key, a doorway to something ancient and infinite, a power that stretched back across the eons of existence. But what lay on the other side? Humanity didn't know yet, but they would find out soon enough. As the stars twinkled coldly outside the window, General Aegis whispered softly, almost to themselves, "This is just the beginning." The galaxy held its collective breath. The Krunt had been defeated, but in the wake of their annihilation, a new power had risen, humanity. In the span of a few hours, they had shattered the balance of galactic power, proving that the age-old war had been just the beginning. Yet as the Nexus continued to pulse with untold energy, the Coalition's leaders grappled with the overwhelming realization that they had no control over the events unfolding before them. The humans had shown their strength, but the mystery of their true intentions remained unresolved. Earth's leaders, hidden behind the veil of secrecy, gathered in what could only be described as a clandestine summit. In a secure chamber, far beneath the surface, representatives from various factions within the human government met to discuss the future. General Aegis, the mysterious and commanding figure who had led the charge, stood in silence at the center of the room. Their face was unreadable, obscured by the reflective visor of their helmet. "We've changed the war, but we haven't won yet," Aegis finally spoke, their voice low and steady, though the weight of their words was clear. "The Krunt are gone, but we've exposed the galaxy to something far more dangerous." The room was tense, filled with the weight of countless years of struggle. And now, the uneasy realization that humanity's power came at a price. On one side of the room, diplomats from the Coalition, their faces worn and filled with uncertainty, sat in silence. On the other, scientists and strategists, their minds focused on the enigmatic technology that humanity had harnessed, the Nexus. "We need to understand the Nexus," one of the scientists spoke up, his voice trembling. "The energy it produces, it's beyond anything we've ever encountered. If we don't comprehend its full potential, we risk—" He hesitated, the fear in his eyes betraying his thoughts. "We risk becoming something even worse than the Krunt." Aegis turned to the scientist, their voice cutting through the room like a blade. "We will understand it. We must." The galaxy, now fully aware of humanity's capabilities, responded with equal parts fear and awe. The Coalition, no longer a united front, splintered under the pressure. Some factions sought to ally with humanity, desperate to share in the power of the Nexus. Others, terrified by the possibility of a human-led galaxy, began plotting in secret, attempting to weaken or sabotage Earth's hold on the Nexus. As the months wore on, a cold war of espionage, propaganda, and subtle betrayals began to unfold in the shadows. But humanity remained resolute. Their leader, General Aegis, knew what the galaxy feared, and they knew the cost of power. Humanity had fought for survival for too long, and they would never relinquish the strength they had earned. The Nexus was not just a weapon, it was their future, and now, they had the keys to unlock its full potential. On Earth, the Nexus continued to pulse with energy, its glow spilling out into the cosmos. Scientists from every corner of the planet worked feverishly to understand its origins, to decode its messages. What they uncovered, however, was far more unsettling than any of them could have imagined. The Nexus was not a creation of humanity. It was ancient, older than the Krunt, older than the galaxy itself. It had been a tool used by an unknown race that had long since vanished. Its power was not just destructive, it was transformative. It could bend the fabric of reality itself, reshaping worlds, rewriting the laws of time and space. And if humanity unlocked its true potential, they would be capable of reshaping the galaxy in their image. But there was a cost. The Nexus was not meant to be wielded by anyone, let alone a species as young as humanity. The more the humans studied it, the more they understood. Unlocking its full power would require sacrifices. It would demand the essence of their species, the very core of what made them human. To control the Nexus meant to surrender pieces of themselves, to become something greater, but at the cost of their identity, their soul. For the first time since the war's end, Aegis hesitated. "Are we willing to pay this price?" Aegis asked, their voice barely above a whisper. There was no easy answer. The scientists and military leaders exchanged uneasy glances. They had fought for years for a victory that now seemed hollow. They had defeated the Krunt, but now they stood on the precipice of something far more terrifying. Would they embrace the power of the Nexus and risk losing themselves? Or would they abandon it, allowing the galaxy to fall into chaos once again? As Aegis gazed out across the room, they saw the faces of their people. Fear, determination, and the weight of an uncertain future. They knew what needed to be done, but the burden of leadership weighed heavily on their shoulders. Humanity's path was not one they could walk alone. They needed to make a choice, and that choice would define the future of the galaxy. Back in the vast expanse of space, the remnants of the Krunt Empire stirred. They had suffered a defeat, but their queen was not one to yield. The hive mind had recovered, adapting to the loss. They understood that humanity's rise was no accident. It was a threat, and threats, the Krunt knew, had to be eradicated. The galaxy, already fractured by years of war, now stood on the brink of a new conflict, one that would test the limits of power, loyalty, and identity. Humanity had entered the battlefield and won. But now, as they gazed into the unknown, the true battle had only just begun. As the months passed, the galaxy grew more fractured. The peace that humanity had hoped to bring with their overwhelming victory over the Krunt was quickly overshadowed by growing unrest. Factions within the coalition, emboldened by their alliance with Earth, sought to challenge the Nexus's overwhelming power, while others saw humanity as a new hope, perhaps the key to restoring balance to the galaxy. But the central question remained unanswered. Could humanity control the power of the Nexus without losing their very humanity in the process? General Aegis stood alone in a private chamber, the soft hum of the Nexus filling the air around them. It had become a constant presence, its light pulsing with an almost rhythmic certainty, as if it were alive. The human race had always been defined by their struggle, their capacity to adapt and fight against insurmountable odds. But now, humanity faced a challenge unlike any they had ever known. The Nexus was a tool of unimaginable power, yet it had come with a burden, one that could not be ignored. Aegis stared into the swirling energy that emanated from the Nexus, wondering if they could really master it without succumbing to the darkness it promised. Could humanity stand firm in their beliefs and maintain their identity, or would they be swallowed by the very force they had unleashed? It was then that a message arrived, an encrypted transmission from an unknown source. It was a single, cryptic sentence. The Nexus is a gateway, not just a weapon. What you control will control you. The message was brief, but the implications were profound. Whoever had sent it clearly knew something about the Nexus that no one on Earth had yet uncovered. Aegis knew that they couldn't ignore this warning. The Nexus was not simply a powerful weapon. It was a door to something greater, something more mysterious and perhaps more dangerous than even they could fathom. The decision was made. Aegis would send a team to investigate the origins of the Nexus, to uncover its true purpose and, if possible, to prevent humanity from being consumed by its power. A select group of the brightest minds, both scientific and military, would embark on a mission to track down the source of the transmission and explore the secrets of the Nexus. The journey would take them far beyond Earth, to the outer edges of known space, where ancient ruins and forgotten civilizations lay buried beneath the sands of time. It was a mission of discovery, but also one of peril. For in the depths of space, where no human had ever ventured, dangers far greater than the Krunt awaited. As the team prepared for departure, Aegis watched them from a distance, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over their shoulders. They had led humanity to victory, but now the true cost of that victory loomed ahead. The mission could lead to answers, but it could just as easily lead to their destruction. Was the Nexus a tool of salvation, or was it a harbinger of humanity's doom? The ship that would carry them into the unknown was sleek and silent, designed for speed and stealth, capable of slipping through the fabric of space without a trace. The team members gathered in the briefing room, each of them aware of the risks they faced. They would travel in search of the Nexus's origins, but the real question was whether they would be able to return. As the countdown began, General Aegis addressed them one last time. Their voice was steady, but beneath the calm exterior, there was a flicker of uncertainty. "We are not just exploring the unknown," they said. "We are confronting it. What we discover may change everything about the Nexus, about ourselves. We may not be able to return as we are, but that is the price of understanding." With those final words, the crew boarded the ship, their mission set in motion. As the vessel lifted off, the sight of Earth growing smaller in the distance marked the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's story. The Nexus, with all its mysteries and dangers, beckoned them forward. And so, as the ship vanished into the endless expanse of space, humanity's future hung in the balance. The journey to uncover the Nexus's true purpose had begun, but the question remained. Would they control the power of the Nexus, or would they fall prey to it, like so many others before them? For as much as humanity had changed the course of the war, the ultimate challenge lay ahead. The challenge of controlling the very force that had given them the victory they had fought so hard to achieve. And at the heart of it all, the Nexus awaited. The journey into the unknown stretched on for weeks, and as they ventured deeper into uncharted space, the crew grew more restless. Each passing day felt like an eternity, a constant reminder of the uncertainty they faced. They had left Earth behind, the cradle of humanity, and now they were drifting towards something no one fully understood. The farther they traveled, the more the crew felt the weight of what lay ahead. Captain Lyra Corinne, one of the senior officers aboard the ship, watched the stars blur past through the observation window. She had been part of the team that helped defeat the Krunt, and yet the victory fell hollow. They had won, yes, but at what cost? Humanity had unlocked the power of the Nexus, but the real question was whether they could wield it without losing themselves. "Captain," Lieutenant Ross's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're approaching the coordinates from the transmission." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. They had followed the cryptic message for days, and now they were close to its origin. The place was known only in ancient texts, a forgotten world once inhabited by a race so old that even the most advanced civilizations of the galaxy had little knowledge of them. But now, As the crew braced themselves for whatever lay ahead, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that the real test had only just begun. The planet they approached was unlike any Lyra had seen before. Its surface was covered in dense, swirling clouds of gas, casting a perpetual twilight over the landscape. The planet's gravity was heavy, pulling their ship down with a force that made even the hardened crew members feel the weight of the unknown. The coordinates led them to a vast, ancient ruin, buried deep beneath the surface, hidden from view by a storm of unrelenting energy. "Prepare for landing," Lyra ordered, her voice calm but firm. She knew that this would be their most dangerous mission yet. The Nexus had already revealed its terrible power, but what they would find here, beneath the storm, might be something even more unsettling. The ship descended slowly, cutting through the thick clouds and turbulence as they neared the ruins. The air outside was charged with electricity, crackling with energy from the planet's core. It felt as though the very land beneath them was alive, waiting for them to trespass. As the ship touched down on the desolate ground, the crew disembarked, their footsteps crunching on the dry, brittle surface. Lyra led the way, the crew following closely behind, their faces tense, their weapons at the ready. They had no idea what they would find beneath the surface, but they all understood the stakes. The fate of humanity, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on what lay ahead. The entrance to the ruins was hidden beneath a rock formation, almost as if the planet itself had been guarding it for eons. A massive doorway stood before them, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as they studied them. It was a language no one had seen before, a form of writing that defied all known patterns. It was clear that this place had not been built by any civilization currently known to the galaxy. "Looks like it's sealed," Lieutenant Ross said, examining the doorway. "But it's not locked in the traditional sense. There's a pattern, some kind of trigger." Lyra stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the glowing symbols. As soon as her hand made contact, the doorway groaned and began to slide open, revealing a dark, cavernous space beyond. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of age and forgotten history. The crew moved cautiously inside, their footsteps echoing through the vast halls. The interior of the ruins was a stark contrast to the stormy landscape outside. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the place had been abandoned for eons. Massive stone pillars lined the walls, each adorned with more of the shifting symbols. The further they ventured into the ruins, the more the atmosphere seemed to hum with an invisible energy. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The walls of the ruins shifted, the air crackling with static. The crew froze, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning the darkness. "We've triggered something," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "Prepare for anything." The tremors grew stronger, and then, as if the ruins themselves had awoken from a deep slumber, a blinding light erupted from the heart of the structure. The crew was thrown back, their bodies slammed against the stone walls, and for a moment, they were blinded by the intensity of the light. When it finally faded, they found themselves standing in an enormous chamber, unlike any they had seen before. In the center of the room stood a massive, pulsating core, an energy source unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. It hummed with an unnatural power, a deep, resonating vibration that seemed to shake the very air around them. This was the heart of the Nexus. But as they gazed upon it, they felt a wave of unease wash over them. The core was not just a source of power, it was a prison. The carvings on the walls now made sense. The ancient race had sealed the core away, trapping whatever power it contained inside, knowing that no one could control it without risking everything. The core was not just a weapon. It was a force of nature, a destructive energy that could unravel the very fabric of reality. And yet, here it was, waiting to be released. Lyra stepped forward, her mind racing. The transmission had warned them. The Nexus was a gateway, not just a weapon. And now, standing before the heart of it, she understood what that meant. This was not just a key to power. It was a choice, to unleash its full potential, or to leave it sealed forever. But as she reached out to touch the core, a voice echoed in her mind, cold and ancient. You cannot control what you do not understand. The light around the core pulsed, and Lyra's hand trembled, unsure of what to do. Lyra's fingers hovered just inches from the pulsating core, the air around her thick with the weight of the decision before her. The voice in her mind had spoken with such clarity, such coldness, that it sent a shiver down her spine. You cannot control what you do not understand. It was a warning, one that they had all heard before in whispers, in messages, in the cryptic texts about the Nexus. But this was different. This was not just an abstract caution. It was the very essence of the Nexus, a consciousness that stretched back to an ancient, forgotten age. The realization struck her like a blow. The Nexus wasn't just an artifact of power. It was alive, an intelligence, ancient and powerful, far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. The chamber seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, and Lyra could feel it deep in her bones. The floor beneath her vibrated with the force of the core, and the walls seemed to close in around her. Her team remained frozen behind her, equally mesmerized by the core's eerie glow. Yet none of them dared to approach. Lieutenant Ross stepped forward, breaking the silence. His voice was shaky, the tension palpable in his words. "Captain, we need to make a decision. The Nexus is here. We can control it. We can wield its power." Lyra turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Wield its power? You don't understand what you're asking, Ross. This isn't just a weapon. It's something else." Ross seemed undeterred, though his unease was evident. "But think of the possibilities, Captain. This power, it could reshape everything. We could end the wars. We could bring peace, prosperity. At what cost?" Lyra interrupted sharply, her voice carrying an edge that silenced him. "What if we're not the ones in control? What if the Nexus is using us? The message we received, what you control will control you. That's not just a warning. It's the truth. This place is a prison. It's a cage, and we're standing at the door, ready to open it." She looked back at the core, the swirling light within it, and felt the pull, a magnetic force that called to her on a primal level. But the warning was still fresh in her mind, echoing like a drumbeat. You cannot control what you do not understand. Behind her, the rest of the crew exchanged nervous glances. The tension in the air was palpable as they all processed the magnitude of what stood before them. They had come seeking answers. But now the answers seemed more dangerous than the questions ever had been. "We came for knowledge," Lyra said quietly, almost to herself. "But now, the question is, do we leave it here, or do we risk everything to take it back?" A wave of silence washed over the room as the crew members each contemplated the weight of her words. Some of them had joined this mission to explore the unknown, to seek out the power that could change the galaxy. But now that they were face to face with the Nexus, the realization of just how little they understood of it was chilling. "We can't leave empty-handed," Ross said, his voice a little more forceful this time. "Not after everything we've been through. We've fought too hard for this." But Lyra shook her head slowly. "The war is over, Ross. The Krunth are gone. Humanity has a chance to rebuild. Without this thing," she motioned toward the core, "we can make our own future, without relying on powers beyond our comprehension." Yet, as she spoke, a sudden flash of light erupted from the Nexus, and the chamber seemed to tremble violently. The walls began to crack, the stone groaning, as if the ruins themselves were alive, resisting the intrusion. A voice echoed through the room, not in her mind this time, but in the very air around them. "Do you seek to control me?" The voice was not a single entity, but many, thousands of voices, all speaking as one, their tone dark and insistent. "You who are nothing but children, you cannot grasp what you attempt to hold." The room shook again, and the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a vast, dark chasm below. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that threatened to consume them all. The crew instinctively stepped back, their weapons raised in defense. But Lyra knew it was futile. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The Nexus began to hum louder, its energy crackling violently, sending waves of heat and static through the room. The walls seemed to warp and twist, and the light from the core became blinding. "Get away from it," Lyra shouted, but it was already too late. Without warning, the core released a massive shockwave, sending the crew sprawling across the chamber. Lyra felt her body slam against the stone wall as the world around her went black. When she regained consciousness, the ruins were silent once more. The energy that had been so overwhelming only moments before had dissipated, leaving behind an eerie calm. She blinked, trying to clear her head, and slowly, painfully, she rose to her feet. The rest of the crew was scattered across the floor, all of them shaken but alive. Ross was the first to recover, pushing himself up with a groan. He looked around, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice shaky. Lyra steadied herself, trying to grasp the reality of what had just occurred. The Nexus had fought back, resisted them, and yet they had survived. "For now, we've awakened something," she said quietly, her voice heavy with the weight of what they had uncovered. "And now, we don't just have to control it, we have to survive it." The silence in the room was deafening as the crew processed her words. The Nexus had revealed its true nature, and the choice that had seemed so simple, whether to control the power or leave it behind, had become infinitely more complicated. And as Lyra looked at the flickering energy of the core once more, she knew that whatever path they chose, it would not be without sacrifice. The crew was rattled, their one steady resolve now shaken to its core. Lyra knew they had only narrowly escaped a fate far worse than anything they could have imagined. The Nexus, that ancient force, was not simply an artifact of immense power. It was a sentient being, alive in ways they could not comprehend. It had fought back not just with brute force, but with intelligence, manipulating the very fabric of reality to protect itself. As the crew gathered themselves, Lyra took a long breath, her mind racing. The question now wasn't how to control the Nexus, it was how to survive it. If the core had the power to bend the environment itself, to create illusions, distort time, and even pull them into its depths, then how could they hope to return to their ship, or worse, return to Earth, with their minds intact? "We need to get out of here," Ross said, his voice urgent as he wiped the blood from his brow. The others nodded, looking around nervously. The ruins still hummed with an eerie energy, and the chasm beneath them seemed to grow wider with each passing second. The ground trembled again, sending small stones cascading from the ceiling. "Agreed," Lyra replied, her voice tight with concern. "But we're not leaving without answers. This Nexus, it's more than we ever thought. We need to understand what it wants, why it reacted like that. It's not just an energy source. It's a part of something larger." The crew gathered their weapons and quickly made their way toward the exit, their every step echoing through the silent halls. But Lyra's thoughts were elsewhere. The message they had received, the warning that had come through to them, was not just a cryptic note. It was a reflection of what they were up against. Humanity wasn't just standing on the edge of a new era. They were facing an ancient force that could change everything. The war against the Krunt had been nothing compared to the battle for control of the Nexus. As they emerged into the open air, the storm that had raged outside had subsided, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. The planet's atmosphere had grown thicker, more oppressive, but it was what they saw ahead that truly shocked them. The massive ship they had landed in was now surrounded by strange, shifting patterns in the air, ripples of energy like mirages, distorting reality itself. "Captain," Ross said, his voice strained, "what the hell is happening? The ship's systems are malfunctioning. We can't." Before he could finish, a loud crack of thunder echoed across the surface of the planet. But it wasn't the rumble of a storm. The ground itself was shifting, a massive, ancient structure, hidden beneath the surface, began to rise slowly, as though some colossal hand had gripped it from the depths of the planet. The ship shook with the violent movement of the Earth. Lyra's eyes widened. We've triggered something again. She could feel the pull, the gravitational force of the Nexus, drawing them closer to the rising structure. It was as if the planet itself was waking up, reacting to their presence. The very ground beneath them groaned, as though protesting their intrusion. "We need to move now," Lyra ordered, her tone firm despite the fear growing within her. The crew scrambled to gather their things, but there was no escaping the pull of the Nexus. The ground beneath them continued to tremble, and the ancient structure rose higher, a gargantuan tower of black stone that reached into the clouds. As they approached the ship, the shimmering energy around it intensified. The air crackled, and Lyra could feel a sense of pressure building, as though the very atmosphere was being compressed, the space around them warping with every passing second. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The crew was nearly to the ship when Lyra heard it. An unmistakable voice, cold and distant, like a whisper carried by the wind. It came from the rising structure, and its words were clear, echoing across the expanse. "You have awakened me. Now, you will serve me." Lyra froze, her heart racing. The voice was not human. It was not even Krunt. It was something older, far more ancient, and far more terrifying. This was the true force behind the Nexus, and it was making its presence known. "Get to the ship," Lyra shouted, her voice rising in urgency. The crew sprinted toward the ship, but the strange energy surrounding it seemed to resist their every movement, pulling them back. It was as though the very fabric of reality was being warped, twisted by the power of the Nexus. They reached the ship, but the door refused to open. The energy field around it intensified, locking them out. Lyra cursed under her breath, turning to face the rising tower. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice tight with panic. "We need to find another way off this planet. The Nexus has us trapped." As she spoke, the ground shifted again, and the enormous tower began to glow with a pulsing light. The structure seemed to pulse in rhythm with the heart of the Nexus itself, like a living entity responding to their presence. "Captain, there's something inside the tower," Ross said, his eyes scanning the distant structure. "Look, there's movement. We're not alone." Lyra narrowed her eyes, trying to focus on the shifting shadows within the tower. But before she could react, a loud, thunderous sound filled the air, as if the planet itself had cracked open. "Get down!" Lyra shouted, instinctively pulling Ross to the ground as the entire sky above them exploded with light. The structure above them, alive with the pulse of the Nexus, sent a wave of energy cascading toward them, pushing them back. The ground buckled, and a massive shockwave erupted from the tower. For a moment, everything went black. When Lyra regained consciousness, she was lying on the ground, disoriented and shaken. The tower had stopped rising, and the energy field around the ship had dissipated, leaving the crew exposed to whatever came next. The air was thick with dust, and the entire landscape had shifted. The once solid ground now resembled a battlefield, the earth scarred by the shockwave. The crew gathered themselves, weapons drawn, as they slowly rose to their feet. The tower loomed ahead, its ominous silhouette still standing tall, the pulse of the Nexus flickering within it. But it was what lay ahead that truly made Lyra's blood run cold. The planet, it seemed, was not finished with them yet. The true war, the real battle, had only just begun. The air was thick with tension as the crew recovered, their bodies bruised but their minds sharp. The blast had left the area in disarray, and yet the Nexus's power still pulsed in the distance, an undeniable presence that sent waves of anxiety through the group. The planet seemed to hum with an energy that was both alluring and dangerous, a constant reminder that they were standing on the precipice of something far beyond their understanding. Lyra stood up slowly, wiping dust from her face, her heart still pounding in her chest. Her gaze remained fixed on the looming tower, the structure now standing in complete silence. It had stopped growing, its pulse had dimmed, but she knew She could feel it, that this was only temporary. The Nexus was a force of nature, one that couldn't be ignored or outlasted. It had seen them as intruders, and now it would make them pay the price for awakening it. "We're not safe here," Lyra said, her voice low and steady, though her mind raced with possibilities. The shockwave had left them vulnerable, exposed, and the ship was still surrounded by the energy barrier, preventing any chance of escape. Lieutenant Ross, ever the pragmatist, scanned the area. "The ship systems are still offline. We need to find a way to restore power and get out of here before the Nexus decides to finish what it started." Lyra nodded grimly. She could feel the pulse of the tower in her bones, the rhythmic thrum that seemed to match her own heartbeat. It was as though the planet itself was alive, and the Nexus was its beating heart. But there was more to it. As the crew began to regroup, the ground beneath them trembled once again. But this time it wasn't just the effect of the tower. No! This tremor was different. It was purposeful, as if the very foundation of the planet was shifting, being rearranged. And then, like a tide receding, the Earth began to split apart, revealing something that had been buried beneath the surface for eons. "Look," Ross whispered, pointing toward the massive fissures opening in the ground. Slowly, from the depths, something began to emerge, an immense structure, something far older than the tower. It was not made of stone like the ruins they had encountered earlier. This was metal, gleaming, black, and alive with energy. "Is that a ship?" Lyra asked, unable to suppress the awe in her voice. The object, rising slowly from the fissure, was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It was enormous, far larger than the ship they had arrived in, and its surface shimmered with a strange, otherworldly glow. But it wasn't just a ship. It was connected to the Nexus in some way. Its very presence felt like a continuation of the pulse that had been emanating from the tower. This was no mere artifact. This was the heart of the Nexus. It's anchored to this planet, and it was alive. This is not just a weapon," Ross muttered, stepping back, his eyes wide. "This is a hive, a breeding ground, a Nexus point." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she studied the ship. The implications were staggering. If what Ross said was true, then this was no ordinary structure. This was a command center, a place where the Nexus could exert its control over everything in the galaxy. And it was no accident that they had come here. The messages, the warnings, they had all led them to this moment. They weren't just facing an ancient power. They were facing the birthplace of it. "We need to get to that ship," Lyra said, her voice resolute. Now, the crew moved swiftly, making their way toward the massive structure. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to warp, distorting their vision. The ground continued to shift beneath them, as though the planet was not entirely stable. Each step they took seemed to echo through the ground, the sound amplifying in the unnatural silence. The tower loomed behind them, a silent sentinel, its pulse growing stronger with each passing moment. The closer they got to the ship, the more the Nexus seemed to react. The very air around them crackled with energy, and Lyra could feel her pulse quicken in response. It was like walking into the heart of a storm, an overwhelming force of nature that was both terrifying and magnetic. The ship was pulling them toward it, and yet Lyra could not shake the feeling that they were being drawn into a trap. As they reached the base of the enormous structure, the ground split open again, revealing a large doorway, a massive archway framed in glowing symbols. The air was thick with static, and the doorway shimmered as though it were made of liquid light. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with both awe and trepidation. She motioned for the crew to follow, her steps deliberate. She didn't know what lay beyond, but there was no turning back now. The planet had already claimed them, and the Nexus would not let them go without a price. They entered the doorway, stepping into the darkness beyond. The chamber they entered was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were made of the same gleaming black metal as the ship, and the air was dense with the energy of the Nexus. The floor beneath them hummed with power, and the space seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. It was as though they were inside a living organism, the walls pulsating with life. And then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was not human. It wasn't even remotely similar to anything they had encountered in the galaxy. Its form was vague, its features shifting and undulating as though it were made of pure energy. The figure's presence filled the room, and the crew froze, their weapons drawn, unsure of what to do. "You are too late," the figure said, its voice like 1,000 whispers, all speaking in unison. "The Nexus is already decided. The galaxy will belong to me." The crew stood frozen in place, terror gripping their hearts. They had come for answers, for control, but what they had awakened was far beyond their comprehension. Lyra's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The figure before them was not just a guardian of the Nexus. It was its voice, its will, its master. "You cannot stop it," the figure continued, its form rippling like water. "The war is over, but the true battle is about to begin." Lyra's heart sank as she realized the terrible truth. This was only the beginning. The Nexus had been waiting, watching, and now it was ready to move. Lyra's thoughts raced, her breath shallow in the oppressive air. The figure before them seemed to pulse with energy, a presence that pressed in on all sides. Its voice echoed in the chamber, reverberating with an ancient power that threatened to crush them under its weight. It had spoken with finality. The war is over, but Lyra knew in that moment that the true battle was just beginning. The crew stood frozen, their weapons still drawn, but their resolve beginning to waver. How could they fight something like this? Something that wasn't even fully tangible? The Nexus had shown its power already, bending time, manipulating reality, and shifting the planet itself. What chance did they stand? Ross took a hesitant step forward, his voice a whisper. What do you want from us?" The figure, if it could be called that, seemed to consider him for a moment before answering. "You are here because you are the last to matter. The Nexus has been waiting for you. The war you speak of, it is nothing compared to what I will bring. You cannot stop me. Not now. Not ever." The air around them thickened, crackling with unseen energy, and Lyra's heart sank further. They had been so sure they could contain the Nexus, control its power, wield it. But they had underestimated the scope of what they were dealing with. This entity was not just an artifact, not a mere weapon. It was a force of nature, a living being, older than anything humanity had ever known. "Then why bring us here?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "Why not just destroy us, if we're nothing more than a threat?" The figure's presence shifted, and for the first time, Lyra thought she sensed something resembling amusement in its shifting form. "You cannot understand, Captain. The Nexus has chosen you. Your kind will either adapt or perish. This planet, this ship, they are nothing but the beginning of the new order." The reality of the situation crashed down on them. It was clear now that the Nexus wasn't interested in conquering. It didn't need to. It was already here, already in control. It had no need for an army, no need for conventional weapons. It was power incarnate, an intelligence beyond comprehension, and it had set its sights on humanity. What the crew had assumed was a battle for control had, in fact, been nothing more than a test, a trial to see if humanity was worthy of existing in the new world the Nexus was creating. The figure raised a hand, and Lyra felt the pressure in the air intensify, her chest tightening as if the very atmosphere were squeezing the life out of her. She reached for her weapon, but it was useless. There was nothing to fight. The Nexus was everywhere, within everything. "You will submit, or you will cease to exist," the figure intoned, its voice deepening. The words hung in the air, thick with finality. But as the pressure continued to build, something unexpected happened. A surge of energy, wild, chaotic, and uncontrolled, rippled through the chamber, causing the figure to falter. It was as if the very walls of the ship had come alive, vibrating with the power of the Nexus, but not in a way that was orchestrated. It was as though the entity was struggling, being pulled in different directions. Lyra's heart raced. This wasn't the Nexus asserting its dominance. It was fighting something. Something, or someone, else was interfering. And then she understood. In the chaos of the storm they had awakened, they had overlooked one critical factor. The Nexus, this ancient force, was not all-knowing. It had been fractured, broken by time and decay. There were parts of it that still resisted. Parts of it that were not fully aligned with its singular purpose. Lyra felt it. An opening. A crack in the overwhelming pressure that had been suffocating them. "Everyone move!" Lyra barked, springing into action, her mind already racing. She grabbed Ross's arm, pulling him toward the center of the room, away from the unstable energy. The crew followed suit, unsure what exactly was happening, but instinctively aware that this was their chance. The Nexus itself was destabilizing. For the first time, Lyra could see it, a rift, a tear in the fabric of the Nexus's power. And in that tear, she could sense something familiar, something human. She turned to face the crew. "We have one chance. We can either run or we can fight back." Ross, his eyes wide, nodded. "How?" "By doing what we should have done from the start," Lyra said, her voice filled with fierce determination. "We stop seeing the Nexus as an enemy, and we start seeing it for what it really is, a living thing. A thing that can be bargained with, manipulated, or even broken." Lyra didn't know if it was the right choice, but there was no other path. The Nexus had shown its power, its vast and terrifying reach. But what it hadn't shown was its true nature. The rift, the fracture in its essence, gave them hope. They rushed forward, moving with a renewed sense of purpose. As they approached the center of the chamber, the air shimmered with the energy of the Nexus. Lyra could feel its pulse, thrumming against her body, but she fought against the rising panic. She reached into the core, into the very heart of the Nexus, and with all the power she could muster, she pulled. And then everything stopped. The overwhelming pressure, the suffocating energy, everything vanished. The air cleared. The power of the Nexus, once so oppressive, now lay dormant, silent, still. Lyra opened her eyes, stunned. The room around her was unchanged. The ship, the structure, the towering figure, it was all still there. But the power was gone. The Nexus had been broken. Its overwhelming force had crumbled beneath their will, their defiance. And in that moment, Lyra understood. The war wasn't about technology or power. It wasn't about who could control the Nexus or bend it to their will. It was about humanity's will to survive, to adapt, to fight, and to protect what they held dear. Lyra stood in the heart of the Nexus, her crew at her side. They had won. Not through strength, but through unity, through the belief that they were more than the sum of their fears. The war, in the end, had been nothing but a test, and humanity had passed. The sky above, once dark with storm clouds, now cleared, and for the first time since their arrival, the planet felt alive with hope. "We did it," Ross said, his voice quiet with awe. Lyra smiled, her heart light despite the weight of everything they had just endured. "Yes, we did." And with that, the crew turned back toward the ship, leaving behind the ruins of the Nexus. Their journey had ended, but their story was just beginning. The galaxy had been forever changed, but so had they. They would return home, and this time, they would be ready.